Howdy ho and welcome to Rauta's Challenging the Classics, nowadays known just as Classic Reviews. This is one of those videos and one of those reviews which is done because what you requested. I've said it before and I will say it again. You can always suggest me to do classic reviews and more importantly challenging the classic concept where we talk about classic releases and wonder, did they really stand the test of time? Are they still worthy? Why are they worthy and why they might not be worthy? Why they are releases that are labeled as classics or one of those releases that should be considered as classics. Today's album, Immolation, Dawn of Possession, a debut album by this American death metal band. Let's just open the Metal Archive site for a little bit of background here so you can check it out, maybe read, take a look while I'll tell you a little bit about the band itself and of course the album, what I think about it and what you should probably pay attention to, what you should remember and know. Now, first the basics. So many people know that America, United States of America that is, has been a big cradle for death metal from the very, very beginning. It is still very much discussed which bands were the first to do death metal and all, but rest assured, so many bands from 1980s basically were the ones that created the whole death metal thing. I mean, there were soon so many bands, so many various countries to do that stuff, but the early ones really got on quite early in the 1980s to deliver what is nowadays known as death metal. By 1990s, the things had progressed quite big. That is, a lot of bands were going on and lots of releases were released and all that stuff. One could even say that so much as black metal started its own first wave in early 1980s, death metal pretty much did the same. But these waves and paths are not exactly the same. Which brings me to topic why Immolation is here. A well-deserved spot, even though the band's debut album Dawn of Possession was released as late as 1991. But the band's origin, it originates as early as 1986, under different moniker though, and since 1988 it has been indeed Immolation. However, Immolation never got the kind of a fame and success as bigger names such as, I guess, Death, Morbid Angel, Obituary, and of course Cannibal Corpse, which is the most successful death metal band, as far as I could tell anyway. But still, Immolation is one of those hard-working bands that kind of never gave up, always kept pushing forward, creating their own kind of dark death metal. But let's be honest about it, didn't necessarily have the most easy to approach kind of a figure. What could be said about so many other bands. I mean, Morbid Angel certainly isn't the most approachable either, but they already had their own unique kind of a catchy, even if a little bit occult and twisty thing going on. Whereas Death very much paved the way, at least with their early albums, just delivering kind of a trash-infused death metal. And same could be said about early Cannibal Corpse, until they really went to the more, say, brutal stuff. So where does Immolation fit in then? I mean, they are definitely American death metal, but they are not like the kind of a mid-tempo Obituary, they're not the occult and twisty Morbid Angel, they're not God-hating like D-Side, and they are not this brutal, violent serial killer and whatever stuff like Cannibal Corpse. So where does Immolation fit in? Actually, I think they have found their niche quite nicely. They have their own ways to do death metal. And if we take a look at these Metal Archives ratings, it could be said very, very factually almost that this could be the most respected death metal band of all times. I mean, take a look at Dawn of Possession. 13 reviews averaging 95%. That's fucking crazy if you ask me. Hereafter, 93. Failures to Gods, 90. And Close to Your World Below, another 93. Even with their fifth album, 92. Anyway, doesn't matter which album you take a look at. On average, it's something like beyond 85. Almost 90. on average of all albums. So I really don't know how many bands can match these kind of numbers. So it's clear the band is very, very well respected. But why on earth they did never make so big impact in terms of sales and success and all that stuff if they made so important and great music? Now that's a tricky question. And I don't want to be this negative Joe, but it's my part to be a little bit critical whatever we have here on the table, whatever kind of classic album we have here. And Dawn of Position is no exception to this rule. I wouldn't say it's a 95% an album. It's a good album, solid, definitely, dark, and kind of an ominous, sinister death metal album, but it is really 10 out of 10 kind of album. Well, not for me anyway. I'll try to explain, and I hope that you can understand some of my points, even if you don't agree. I am not looking for agreement. I'm only looking for understanding. And maybe, in case you have missed this album, you will also give this album a listen, because it's definitely worth it. Now, Immolation's debut album came in 1991. That's already recovered, and by that time, so many bands were doing different kind of things. Much like black metal second wave was already spreading its tentacles to many different directions. That was already going with death metal by this time as well. So Immolation, I guess, was a little bit late to the first wave of the party, but still, it's one of those most essential death metal bands coming from United States of America. Not just as big as some of those bigger names, but still, somehow they were already able to do very, very solid death metal debut, maybe because of demos, maybe because of, a lot of experience before they did their first album. And ever since, when they kept going after this one, they didn't make weak stuff. Anyway, as far as I could tell, I'm not sure if I have heard every album, but most of the stuff I've heard and see them on, on stage, live and all that stuff, they are a solid band with some solid dudes. Met the vocalist guy, Rostolan, a couple of years ago at Steelfest, made an interview with him, and he's a really, really nice and pleasant guy, but also this very, very convincing figure on stage. I mean, he can handle those vocals, he can handle his instrument, and he can be really, really nice guy, and very down to earth, despite being one of these, I guess we could say, godfathers of American death metal, even if not the first wave, or first part of the first wave, let's put it this way. But what about Dawn of Position? What makes it so worthy that it's praised here with these huge reviews and, being worshipped in, I guess, so many universal ways? Yet it's one of those bands that so many people don't keep talking about it. Not the same way that about those bigger names or even more cult names. It seems like Immolation is every now and then a little bit forgotten, even if old-timers will remember that. And when it's mentioned, people are like, yeah, Immolation is good. But how come it is never mentioned as often and in great appraisal or whatever when we're talking about death metal? That is something I truly don't know, but I think I kind of understand. No, Dawn of Position is an album which is solid because of it's very dark and it's actually well produced. It has these good, even if quite monotone, death metal vocals. The kind of a growling that is strong and powerful and has this kind of a traditional death metal tone, but it isn't exactly the most dynamic of it all. But once again, it's a debut album, it's not the fifth one or the third one or anything like that. It is one of those, let's open our game, let's start a career here. And still, they delivered a very, very solid album. But it's not very catchy an album. Actually, it's filled with these weird riffs, which end abruptly, only to start a new beginning after that one. So it's filled with very, very dark passages and riffs which are clearly very heavy, very brutal in a way, but it's not one of those blast beat all the way. It's not those hyper-technical albums, even though I would say it's definitely having twists and bits of technical parts. So at the same time, it's very sinister and kind of evil sounding and dark as it's heavy, and at the same time having these technical twists without going overboard. Compared to bands such as Cannibal Corpse, which is kind of brutal but also more straightforward, or Death, which definitely had its own grooviness and very different kind of flow of things in terms of death metal, Immolation is a little bit a different breed. It's not easy to approach like Obituary, even if Obituary's vocals are quite, weird compared to Immolation's more traditional death metal vocals. Immolation is kinda in a between a rock and a hard place. I'll try to once again explain what I mean with that. Because some of the riffs are actually quite the opposite of being catchy and easy to get into, they can kind of have this addictive value because you kind of want to hear what's behind the next corner instead of just like, okay, now I get where this song is going, which is something that you could say about very many basic heavy metal albums and classic rock. Immolation doesn't let you go that easily. It gives you these twists and weird passages only to make you keep guessing what's going on next. So it's kind of like an album that could be very, very well a grower. But also because it's complications and being more complex, it could be really kind of a pushing you away from it. Like, okay, this is not an easy album. This is not something that you just enjoy while having your brunch. But you kind of need to accept that darkness, that heaviness, and that evil feeling, and then you can embrace it. So what I think about it, if thinking in a critical sense, I think it's a good album. I think it's definitely a kind of a classic album. But it is appealing to my basic instincts in terms of death metal. Does it really deliver me with the perfect pizza? Excuse me, my metaphor. And I don't know, or I actually do know. No, it doesn't. I mean, it pushes some of the right buttons, and I'm like, check, I like the evil feeling. Check, I like the heaviness. I like the growly vocals. I like the production. I like that the guitars are doing these weird things. But some of those really abruptly ending riffs kind of make me ponder they did better after this one. So while this is a good and solid album, and as such very good for a starter, it is clear that the guys kept honing and polishing their ideas and evolving, progressing from this part to the next level after this one. So while this is something that is not easy to enjoy, and that might be one of the reasons why I am a little bit more negative than I thought I could have been, there is something that kind of stops me to fully enjoying this one. I mean fully, like 95% on average. So for me it's like a little bit of like 75%, if you get what I mean. So definitely a good and solid release, but I could list dozens and dozens of death metal albums which are more suited for me. So once again, this comes all down to your favorite personal preferences. I mean, some people like certain kind of grooviness. Some people kind of require certain kind of a fast pace and all that stuff. And that's where Immolation falls between these certain, expectations. It's not that fast, so it won't be ticking those boxes like, okay, this is fast and straightforward, smashing the god's face and all that stuff. So it doesn't really do the D-side thing. Then again, it doesn't really deliver this kind of a Cannibal Corpse brutality. Not to mention these even more brutal bands. So in case you're looking for kind of a slam and brutal death metal, Immolation can actually feel, I wouldn't say lame, but quite lightweight in those terms. So it's not super technical, even though it has these technicalities. It's not so easygoing as some of those easier bands, especially the kind of a Swedish kind of death metal, Entomb, the Dismember, which definitely have these kind of simple riffs which keep you going, kind of a rock and roll grooviness. So I don't know, Immolation falls with their debut album, that is, once again, in this hard spot. Some people will definitely love it and worship it because it's actually kind of unique. But for the similar reasons, some people are like, it's not for me. And maybe this actually explains why it's not so universally celebrated as, some of those bands which I already mentioned a couple of times. So definitely an interesting release in so many ways. And I don't know why or how these kind of bands could have been really doing better debut albums. For example, I like Necrophagia more as a whole than Immolation, but I think Immolation's debut album is actually quite a bit better than what Necrophagia was doing. Then again, if the comparison would include Morbid Angel or Cannibal Corpse, or death, etc. Well, it's a different game once again. But I don't like to compare this too much. I just use these name-dropping elements here to give you a little bit insight to these differences, like what is going on with the bands. And once again, I want to emphasize this. It all comes down to your personal preferences. So there is no way out to saying like, this band is better than this one, or this album is better than that one, because it all comes down to these three factors. Some might say Dawn of Possession is the best death metal album ever, period. And it would be a valid point because, I mean, it's, generally speaking, a good album. But is it good or great? Well, that depends on this particular individual. I think it has definitely gotten its classic status, and I think people should give Immolation more recognition, more respect, and listen to it. But I kind of understand if it doesn't really fit your record collection, because it's harder to get into than so many of those more recognized albums. So, tricky pony, but definitely worth giving a shot. If you like this review, if you like more of these coming your way, please give me a thumbs up. If you hate the concept, give it a thumbs down. You can vote. And more importantly, you can always recommend or suggest a next challenging the classic review album which should be reviewed, and let me take a look if I can do it for you in a matter of weeks. Meanwhile, go listen to some Immolation, and if you don't get better things to do, check out my interview with the band. Thanks for checking out here on Rauta. Take care and listen to some good shit.